So good evening and a huge thank you to all of our Total Wine and More concierge sales members who are joining us, and to everyone else who's joined the proceedings this evening as well. My name is Gareth Howells. I'm the North American brand ambassador for the Bacardi single malt portfolio. And this evening, I'm really excited because we are joined by Stephanie MacLeod for what's going to be quite an epic evening of whiskies. So tonight, we are going to be trying the whiskies from the House of Aberfeldy. We'll have a vertical tasting of the 12, the 16, and the 21-year-old, as well as a tasting of our brand new Aberfeldy 18-year-old Côte Rôtie red wine cask finished whiskey, which is soon to be released within the coming days. Now, before I hand over to our very own malt master, Stephanie MacLeod, I wanted to mention a couple of things just to put some context into how lucky we are to have Stephanie with us this evening. So since the founding of Dewar's in 1846, there have only been 7 master blenders in the company's 175-year illustrious history. Now, being highly qualified for this prestigious role, Stephanie has now assumed, or I say assumed the role of Master Blender, and is responsible for the famed blending legacy of not only Dewar's, but also the single malts that exist within the Dewar's portfolio. I mean, it really is a pleasure for me to be involved and be co-hosting this with Stephanie today. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things because Stephanie truly is a rock star of the Scotch whiskey industry. In 2018, Stephanie, by the Icons of Whiskey Award, was awarded Master Blender of the Year. In 2019, IWC, which is the International Whisky Competition, awarded Stephanie the Master Blender of the Year award. And in fact, doing so, Stephanie became the first female recipient of this award ever. As though that wasn't enough, Stephanie backed that up with the same award as Master Blender of the Year in 2020 and again in 2021. So it is a huge pleasure for me to be able to introduce and work with Stephanie tonight to introduce our malts portfolio to you. Now, before I hand over, I just wanted to say we do have an active Q&A session that's going to be going on. So if anyone has any questions, please drop them into the Q&A. I'll feed them through to Stephanie. Or if you've got any comments on the whiskey or things you'd like us to know, feel free to use the chat function as well. Now, Stephanie, over to you.
Thank you, Gareth. So I'm talking to you from Glasgow in Scotland, and it's very cold and wet outside. And so I'm looking forward to Dram to warm me up. So yes, I'm Stephanie MacLeod. I'm the Dewar's Master Blender and Malt Master. And 2021 is a big year for Dewar's, because in 1846, 175 years ago, John Dewar, our founder, opened his shop in Perth. So this is a big year for Dewar's. And obviously we're just, the whole world is starting to open up. And so it's a really great year for us and great things ahead for our malts. Also for our blends. At the end of this tasting, we're going to be giving you a little sneak peek of what's coming up in Aberfeldy exceptional casks very soon. People often ask me, what is it I do? I think people often think that I sit about in a leather armchair by a fire drinking whiskey all day. And if only that was the truth. It's my job, my privilege, actually. I know I've got the best job in the world, but it is my privilege to watch over our new make spirit that's made at our distilleries, including Aberfeldy, watching it mature, ensuring it's going into the correct type of casks. So we can only use oak casks, and Scotch whisky must be matured for a minimum of 3 years. Otherwise, it can't be called Scotch whisky. And, watching and tasting and nosing the casks as they're maturing is a thing of wonder, because the whisky comes off our stills at Aberfeldy, a colourless liquid. full of flavor, but absolutely no color whatsoever. We put it into the casks and it's almost like a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, because it's full of vibrancy, full of color, full of flavor, full of interest. And that's why we launched the Exceptional Cask range, was because we wanted to celebrate the differences that we can find between two casks that are filled with the same spirit on the same day in the same part of the warehouse, can produce completely different, well, not completely different, they're both Aberfeldy, but can give a different nuance to the flavor profile of Aberfeldy. And so what we do is we have three types of exceptional casks. We have the single cask, where it is just the contents of one individual cask. And so we have to literally sample hundreds of these casks, and we choose a few from those hundreds of casks. So that's our single casks. And then we have the double cask. So that's where we take spirit from one cask and fill it into a different type of cask. So it could be a sherry cask, might even be a bourbon cask, could be a wine cask. And that is what we term as a finish, a double cask. And then we have our small batch. So that could be a finish, or it could be a range of casks that we've looked at and we've thought that together these make something really interesting. So that's our exceptional cask range, and that's what we're going to be looking at later. The Aberfeldy Distillery, which is what we're going to focus on tonight, was actually the only distillery to have been built by the Dewars family. And it's centred in the geographical heart of Scotland. And, you know, if you were to draw lines through the map of Scotland, you'd find Aberfeldy right in the middle. And coincidentally, it is also the heart of Dewars, as well as being a single malt in its own right. And the Dewars family chose this spot in Aberfeldy because it was beside a beautiful, clean, sparkling body of water. And we call Aberfeldy the Golden Dram, and there's two reasons for that. First of all, it tastes golden, it's smooth, it's honeyed, it's rich, and it's approachable. But also there are deposits of gold in the water surrounding Aberfeldy. Now, you're not going to find nuggets of gold in your bottle of Aberfeldy. I'm going to say that now. But we do like to talk about, you know, the coincidence that we call this our golden dram, but we can find gold deposits, and people pan for gold in this area of Scotland. So there is something behind, you know, not just the taste, but also an actual geological happening in Aberfeldy. So enough about geology. And let's go on to the whiskey. So we've got three whiskies that we want to go through. First of all, our 12, our 16, and our 21. Sorry, Gareth, would you like to come in and talk a wee bit as well?
I was just going to ask Stephanie, how many times have you been panning for gold out the back of the distillery at the Firthily Burn?
Every time I go up. I've never actually tried. It's always a wee bit cold, actually. But yeah, people have found gold. So you're going to be getting your wellies on, I suspect, the next time you're over in Aberfeldy.
I have a funny feeling we'll be back out there with Tommy and John Alexander the next time we're at the distillery. They're often found out back with a gold pan causing some kind of mischief. So yeah, Aberfeldy Distillery. It produces, even as a new make spirit, a spirit that is grassy, so freshly cut grass notes, but also very fruity and with beautiful soft cereal notes. So right off the bat, you know,
we have this beautiful new make spirit that we can then fill into all these beautiful refill casks we use, bourbon casks from the US, and also sherry casks from Spain. So we use a whole variety of different casks, and this gives us this light and shade that we have in Aberfeldy. And the process of making Scotch whisky, we start with a batch of malted barley. And this is milled in our mill. Now there's a beautiful aroma when you're standing in the mill house of Aberfeldy Distillery. And when you nose a glass of Aberfeldy, and if you've visited the distillery, and I highly recommend that you do, you're almost transported back to the mill house because it gives this lovely warm cereal aroma. So it's milled, it's then mashed, which looks like a kind of oatmeal consistency, or porridge, as we call it in Scotland. And in this process, we're trying to extract as much sugar as we possibly can from the milled malted barley. And we do that by adding hot water, which gets increasingly hot. And then what we produce at the end of that is a sugary liquid called wort. Doesn't sound very attractive, it's W-O-R-T, but it is really a very sugary water. That's then pumped over to what we call the washbacks, and that's where fermentation occurs. So we add the yeast to the wort, and at the end of the fermentation process, which is a relatively long fermentation process, and that's what produces all these lovely fruity notes that we detect in Aberfeldy, in the new make spirit, and then in the matured spirit. So it ferments, it produces the wash, and then the really exciting bit, it goes into the still house. And there's two sets of stills. It first of all goes through the wash stills, and it produces a spirit type called low wines, and that is about 23% alcohol. This is then pumped over to the spirit stills. 3 fractions are produced, but we take the middle section, the middle cut, the heart it's also known as, and that's what we use to fill into our oak casks. The oak casks then lie in our warehouses in Scotland, and for Aberfeldy, that's a minimum of 12 years. So the 12-year-old. So hopefully you've got a glass in your hand. You'll see that my glass is tapered at the top. It's actually not a Dewar's branded glass, I have to say, but just ignore that. So it's wide at the bottom, tapered at the top, and that's so that when we swirl the Aberfeldy 12-year-old and we have a nose, we're collecting all the aromas at the top of the glass. So with Aberfeldy 12, what are we getting? Well, the first thing that you're getting is that it's rich, it's perfumed, it's rounded. Those notes of heather, honey, sweet, fruity notes. So some people are getting pineapple, you might be getting apple. Some people get berries, lots of buttery toffee. And these toasted, remember I was talking about when you nose the whiskey, it transports you back to the mill house. So that's what I'm getting as well, just at the very end. And when we take a sip, just rests beautifully on the palate. Again, more of these beautiful cereal notes, which come more to the fore actually on the palate than they do on the nose. And it just spreads evenly across the palate. One of my friends was drinking some Aberfeldy 12 ones, and he said, It's so smooth. I feel as if it's coming out of my ears as well. And that's what people feel when they drink it. And hopefully you're having that experience as well. It really is. People love saying to me that they don't like whiskey. And, you know, and I always say to them, you haven't tried a whiskey yet that you like. And there's so many whiskeys out there that, you know, there's one that suits everybody. And I often recommend Aberfeldy. Obviously, I recommend Aberfeldy, but, you know, because it is so approachable. And not only is it approachable, but it's interesting as well. So there's something that's going to hold your attention.
Stephanie, I mean, that's a really interesting point, because there's a lot of preconceived ideas that people have regarding Scotch. Now, whether they're true or not, they do exist. And one of the biggest ones I think we come across a lot is people are like, no, I don't like Scotch. I don't like things that are smoky. I don't like peat. I don't like hospital corridors, Band-Aids, iodine, whatever flavor descriptor you want to use. And I think that's one of the things I love most about Aberfeldy is its approachability, because it is 100% non-peated barley. And there's this beautiful rare honeyed note that really defines the house style that exists in each and every mark of whiskey that you create. But in the same way, Aberfeldy really is a whiskey drinker's whiskey as well. Because it doesn't matter what you drink or where you drink it from, or even what it's been aged in. If you hand someone a glass of Aberfeldy, now I fully understand that I may be a bit biased. I do work for the company, but you have to trust me on this. I'm an equal opportunities whiskey drinker, but there's always something familiar in that glass of Aberfeldy that just endears itself to people. You're never going to get it handed back. And I think that's a true testament to the quality, not only of the historic style of liquid, but also the liquid and the marks that you release each and every time you bring them out nowadays as well. Yeah.
I mean, that is great to hear, because, you know, you spend a lot of time, you know, talking to whiskey drinkers and also bartenders as well. And, you know, some of you out there may not like this idea, but news flash, you can actually make Aberfeldy into a cocktail. Yep. If you go on our website, we've got lots of amazing cocktails, most of them involving honey in some way. But really, we want you to have fun with whiskey. We don't want you to feel as if you've got to stand on ceremony to it. You know, we put a lot of love and a lot of passion into every drop of whiskey that we make, and this is over generations. But we don't want you to toil over it. We want you to enjoy it, because it was the purpose of whiskey, was to give comfort, to bring people together, to share stories. And, you know, we want you to enjoy it, and we want you to enjoy it however you want to. So you can drink it neat, you can have it on the rocks, put ginger ale in it, have it in a really fancy cocktail, but drink it however you want to drink it.
Now,
that is my advice.
That brings up a really pertinent question. How do you like to enjoy your Aberfeldy?
Well, I've never put water in it. I'd never put ice in it. No, only kidding. I actually, it depends how I'm feeling, actually. I love it in an old fashioned. I think it really sets up well, especially 21, actually. But I do like it with ice. Or, you know, if you're exploring a whiskey for the first time, I would always say, try it first with a bit of water, try it neat. You know, just to see, you know, just to explore all the facets of it. And then once you like it, you know, that's it, you know, just drink it however you want to drink it. So it really depends on the mood. I'm not a fantastic cocktail maker, so it has to be something really simple. So an old fashioned is about as much as I can manage. I can definitely do a Mamie Taylor. So that is whiskey, ginger ale, fresh lime juice, and then a wedge of lime. And that is a beautiful drink. And a lot of my friends they're all saying, we don't like whiskey. We wouldn't like a whiskey cocktail either. And I gave them a Mamie Taylor and they were like, what is this? So they were all converted like that. So yeah, and someone's saying here about, you know, hearing about the history is making you appreciate the taste. I mean that's the thing about making Scotch whiskey, is that the whiskey that we're distilling today, we may never see in a bottle. And yet we all put, you know, every effort that we can into making that the best whiskey for future whiskey drinkers and also for future blenders. You know, I want to make sure that I'm putting down really good spirit in really good casks so that the blenders of the future will have a beautiful inventory to work with. That's what it's all about.
Stephanie, I do love a good Mamie Taylor.
Now.
Interestingly enough, it's actually one of the earliest and only cocktails that can date its origins back to Chicago, Illinois.
Really? I didn't know that.
Supposedly so, yeah. So Christina Magro, one of our Chicago bartenders, we actually brought her out when we came to Tales on Tour a couple of years ago. I think it was 2018. Shared that fun fact with us a little while ago. But yeah, so there you go. Now you know.
Yeah, I'll be able to share that fun fact with my friends now. So next up, Aberfeldy 16. We launched this one a few years ago. And what we did with this one was that we gave it a final finish in Oloroso sherry casks. And really it was just to celebrate that sherry element and really augment that sherry element that is part of the Aberfeldy house style. So Aberfeldy 16, smooth, intriguing. Again, the honey notes coming through, but a freshness of citrus coming through. Spiced pears. I don't know if you've ever tried to poach pears in wine or fortified wine. That amazing aroma of spice and fruit is present here. And that aroma of cloves coming through just from the Oloroso sherry element. And again, those caramel notes that are ever present in Aberfeldy. So let's have a taste.
Stephanie, when we talk about the 16, of course, we have that initial maturation period in that ex-American and ex-European oak for a minimum of 16 years. But then there's an additional step you take with the 16-year-old that kind of, for me, brings in these beautiful flavors of dark chocolate and fruitcake.
Yeah.
What is that step? What are you doing to the whiskey that's a little bit different?
Yeah, so that's the finish. So that's finishing it in Oloroso sherry casks, and really for that very reason that you're talking about is to augment the sherry character of the Aberfeldy house style. Chocolate, that's a really great characteristic of Aberfeldy 16. And you know, at Year's Aberfeldy Distillery that I was talking about earlier, they do a tour that involves tasting chocolate with Aberfeldy. And I had the really terrible job of having to choose the chocolate that would go best with the whiskey. You know, someone's got to do it. I get all the really terrible jobs. So that was great fun. And chocolate and whiskey go so well together. A lot of people don't believe me when I say that, but I think it's something about, you know, if you try an expensive chocolate and maybe an inexpensive chocolate. So inexpensive chocolate feels quite gritty and falls apart unevenly on the palate. And expensive chocolate feels really smooth on the palate and it melts evenly. And I think that's the same with whiskey. You know, a really well matured, smooth whiskey just melts softly on the palate. And if you pop a square of chocolate in your mouth at the same time, it is bliss. So really, you should try it. If you've got a bar of chocolate beside you, preferably a really good quality one. It really is a treat. So yes, on the palate, again, the soft cereal notes, the spiciness that's coming from the Oloroso sherry. And Oloroso sherry, you might think of it as being sweet, but actually Oloroso has got a dry finish to it. So we get this beautiful, long yet dry finish coming up. Someone's saying they're going to get their Swiss chocolate. Yep.
That sounds like a really good idea, Cindy. Stephanie, I absolutely love the 16. I think what I really like most about it is you get that DNA that you would expect from an Aberfeldy whiskey, but you just get these beautiful layers of nuanced flavor that then kind of just drifts through, but that the finish on it, the linger, it just rests at the back of your tongue. And as we'd say back home, it just sits on your jowls, and then it's just like a waves, just waves repeating over a beach. It truly is an evocative whiskey.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to describe it. So we've had the 12, had the 16. So, you know, we've benefited from 4 more years of maturation in the Aberfeldy 16. We're now going to look at the Aberfeldy 21. Now, the 21 is a really special whiskey. You know, it spent at least 21 years in oak casks. What were you doing 21 years ago? So all that time, you know, without you going to say you weren't born. Come on, Gareth. Come on.
No, not at all. I think I was probably getting into some kind of trouble 21 years ago. Half my age, Stephanie. Half my age.
Yeah. So the 21-year-old. You know, 21 years in oak casks, but you don't feel, you know, it doesn't exert itself. You don't feel as if you're chewing on a fence post. It's really soft oakiness that we're getting from this, and really richly textured. Again, the honey coming through, but creaminess now, real creamy intensity. Lots of dried fruit, and those heather notes coming through. So that's kind of a intense floral note if you've never come across Scottish heather before. And toasted coconut is something that I love to find in a whiskey, and it just gives that sort of sleekness to the whiskey, and it makes it so succulent. We also get nuttiness coming through, so macadamia nuts. So that kind of, I think you described it the other night, Gareth, as being a kind of silkiness that we get with macadamia nuts, and that we also find in Aberfeldy.
There's something about that reference to macadamia nut that doesn't just bring up the taste, but it's just the way that those nuts break down, and then you get that silken texture in your mouth afterwards. So it's a combination for me of the two. It's what it tastes like, but then also how it feels as you eat them as well. And I think it's a very acute descriptor for that experience that you have when you try the 21-year-old. Now, look, we actually just had a quick question from Sarah, Stephanie. She was asking, how do you know what to put away? And I'm going to assume that Sarah means whiskey for 21 years from now.
That's an excellent question, Sarah. What we do is every year, and we're actually doing this at the moment, we get forecasts from all of our markets around the globe, and they try to predict you know, what they're going to be selling next year, the year after, and 12, 20, 25, 30 years in the future. And so we have to start laying down spirit now, the new make spirit from our distilleries, on the basis of these forecasts. Obviously, things change, but we always try to ensure that we're being as optimistic as we possibly can be, because we don't want to run out of whiskey. We don't want to have too much of it either, because then that could be quite wasteful in terms of, you know, the cask that we need and the warehouse space that we need. But it's all very much based on predictions and what we've done before, and so what we think we're going to do in the future. So yes, a crystal ball would be very beneficial to this.
Stephanie, in my mind, I'm just thinking about
that.
your job description right now. So you're the drinker of all the whiskey, the eater of all the chocolate, and the reader of the crystal ball.
Yes, that sums it up.
Now, look, age statements are something that is very important to doers. And you and the team, I believe it was back in 2017 with the release of the Doers 25, when you reworked from that old Tom Aiken signature formula. But there's a very bold statement that we as a company, and you in particular, led the charge for regarding the use of age statements and the protection of the use of age statements within the whiskies that we produce. And I think everyone would be probably quite interested to hear what that is and what our stance is regarding aged whiskey.
Yeah, so for all of our single malts and all of our premium blends, we're completely committed to age statements. So you will always find a number on the labels of our bottles. And you know, a lot of companies have moved away from age statements, and I can completely understand why. I mean, it goes back, Sarah, to your question about how do you know how much to put away? We don't. And sometimes that decision is made, that age statements become abandoned and then maybe picked up when stocks come back. But at Dewar's, we are committed to it. It makes life very difficult for us. And there's often wouldn't it be nice if we could take that age statement off? But no, we are committed to it. And it's something that, you know, I hope we always will be, because, you know, we have taught our whiskey drinkers, the whiskey industry have taught our whiskey drinkers that if it's been in the cask for longer, it's better. And then all of a sudden, taking age statements away. Age statements for me act as a signpost, act as, you know, a guide for maybe the intensity of the cask contribution to the whiskey. So I really think it's important, and I know that the whiskey drinkers that I talk to still really appreciate that we put age statements on our whiskies.
I just want to quickly point out to everyone who didn't realize, Stephanie released a 51-year-old whiskey a few years ago that she decided that she would give away globally to whiskey enthusiasts around the world for free. So just...
Well, I have to say it wasn't just, in fact, it wasn't my decision. Yes, I don't think I'd be sitting here if it was me that decided to do that. But, you know, we are at Dewar's, we are about almost, you know, the 51-year-old Craigellachie. We could have put a huge price tag on that. But our brand team thought, well, let's do something a bit different. Let's open it out to Craigellachie fans, you know, applying for a chance to taste it, as well as the whole flight of other Craigellachies. We set up events all over the world, and people got together and tasted wow, a 51-year-old whiskey. So it was a bold move, but it's one that people still talk to me about. So it's worked. It's worked. So that is the core range, the 12, the 16, the 21, and you can see the development in complexity, in intensity, as you go up the age statements. But what always remains is the honeyed sweetness and the approachability, and also the complexity and the interest in it. So each time you go back to an Aberfeldy, you're going to find something that, oh, I didn't notice that before. I'm getting menthol, or I'm getting bananas, or I'm getting pineapple. You know, so there's, as your palate develops, so you might be new to whiskey, you might not be new to whiskey, but your palate develops through time and through tasting different types of whiskies. So the reason that you're all here, I'm sure, is to hear about our really exciting Aberfeldy 18 that has been finished not in sherry, but in French red wine casks from the Côte Rôtie region of France. So it really, excuse me, it really is a very special whiskey. So this has been matured for at least 18 years. We were offered these casks last year, and when we heard what they were, we basically just jumped to the chance, because this is the third expression of red wine casks from France. So we started off with Pomerol, we then moved into Pauillac casks, and now Côte Rôtie. So, you know, hopefully you've got a dram of this in your hands. So look at the color. You know, you can see almost a tinge of that red wine influence coming through. And, you know, for me, finishing isn't about dominating the whiskey with the character of the cask. It's about complementing it. And so when these casks arrived in Scotland, you know, the first thing that we did was we took out the bungs and we nosed the casks. And our mouths were watering by the end of it, because we could just get so much wine character coming from these beautiful casks. And French wine casks, I don't know if you've ever seen one before, but they are works of art. They don't just smell beautiful, they look beautiful. So they're just a visual, a complete sensory treat. So we knew that Aberfeldy was just going to lap up the luxury of these casks. So we filled the 18-year-old into them, and what we do, we don't just sort of let it sit and then after 6 months we take it out and bottle it. We sample it on a monthly basis, or more frequently if we feel that it needs that. And what we're doing is we're looking for the color to develop. We're looking for the aroma to develop. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to catch it before it tips over to becoming, you know, too much of the red wine influence coming through. So that is really important. So this one finished in the Côte Rôtie for about 8 months, I think it was. And that was just the right amount of time. and the whiskey does take on a pink tinge when we put it into red wine casks. And, you know, the first time I came across it, which was when I actually started in the role, and I thought, oh my goodness, pink whiskey, what am I going to do? I'm going to get sacked, my first blend. But it does eventually go to a kind of sort of a deep orange color, burnt orange, and then it goes back to the amber color again. So it's quite short-lived, the pink tinge. So let's have a nose. It's beautiful. So really silky, but just packed full of flavor, such integrated flavors, you know, rich fruitiness. You know, we talk about, I don't know if you're familiar with desserts and puddings, but an Eton mess. So it's meringue, it's cream, raspberries or strawberries. So you get the sharpness of the berries with the sweetness of the meringue and the creaminess that comes from the cream. So it's just so beautifully mouth-filling. It's refreshing on one hand and then so comforting on the other hand with that creaminess that's coming through. But also a kind of freshness, that kind of zing of a candied lemon peel coming through. And then just sort of mellowing out into vanilla, butterscotch, toffee, you know, these kind of rich, creamy, sweet notes that are coming through. So it really is a delight. What do you think of it, Gareth?
Stephanie, I remember my first memory when I got the bottles through from you guys in Scotland was having a look at the color in the glass, and it was just this gorgeous burnt amber, and I was comparing it to the other whiskies that we have within the core portfolio, and I was just blown away by the color. And then I remember the nose. It was just these red berries, abundant, straight off the top, but there was almost this floral quality to it as well. But there has not been one person that I've sampled this on yet that has given this back and not absolutely fallen in love with it. Now, look, we had a couple of comments that came through just quickly regarding finishing. Scott Jenkins, hello Scott, out in Dallas, I believe, would love a Chinon finish, Aberfeldy. I think that's twice that's been mentioned in the last week. And then we also had Cindy on the Q&A, and she wanted to know whether we had a favorite cask finish and why.
You're really asking me to choose my favorite child. It's a hard one. You know, I love this one. Each new one that we do, I mean, I love this one because it's got this freshness on the nose, and then when you have a sip of it, you just get this vanilla kick on the palate. I mean, it's just so beautiful, and just the sharpness as well on the palate and the cereal notes. So I love working with wine casks because, first of all, the casks are so well made, and as I mentioned before, they're beautiful looking. The wine that you know, we are choosing wine from renowned regions in France, you know, the best winemaking traditions. And so it's great quality wine that has been in these casks. And so the combination of our well-matured whiskey with this well-matured, beautiful wine bursting with character, you know, each one that we do just gives us this is a new view of it. It kind of looks at Aberfeldy through a different lens, and that's really what we're trying to achieve with the Exceptional Cask series and these different wine finishes. So that is exciting. So, you know, I can't really say that I've got a favorite, because each time we do it, I say, oh, this one is really great. So we're learning more and more as we go through this, and trying out different types of casks, and it just, the experience gets better and better for me.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk about the wine casks, especially with the Côte Rôtie. I mean, we are dealing with the Rolls Royce of Rhone Valley wines here. I mean, we're right in the northern tip, predominant influence of Syrah grapes that are coming into these casks. And I mean, I just find it fascinating, just the effect, the nuances that they have the ability to bring into that Aberfeldy house DNA, so to speak. We actually had a really interesting question come through from Anthony as well. And I know, Cindy, you asked another one. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But Anthony was asking, do you think that Aberfeldy is particularly well suited to a wine cask? Or is it more about getting high quality casks? Because he's had several wine cask finished whiskies that just didn't work as well. But for whatever reason, it seems to just be a natural fit with Aberfeldy.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really good cask supplier who is based in France, and they always give us good quality casks. But I think there is something about Aberfeldy. It does have a very amenable, a very amiable nature, and it gets on with most cask finishes, and I think it is a kind of match made in heaven. that the flavor profile of Aberfeldy is just melding with these red wine components, but we've also put Aberfeldy into Sauterne casks, and that goes really well. So yes, the Aberfeldy, as we said before, it's such an approachable, and there's Gareth showing you a little picture of the very one. So yes, I think you're right. I think Aberfeldy is suited to this, but also, you know, we're getting in really good quality casks, and we're actually doing some work at the moment where we've used those casks again. So we're going to use them a second time, just to explore what does it look like the second time round, and so that we can get, you know, everything that we can from these beautiful casks, and really, you know, show them off to their full potential.
So Stephanie, what I'm going to do is, we've got two questions, but I can loop these together. One of them is from Alison, and then we've got a follow-on question from Cindy. So Alison was asking, are there any particular characteristics that you're looking for in the casks before you start the aging process? And then to follow on, Cindy was asking, is there a calculation that you have or parameters that you follow when you're looking at the right timings for a finishing cask in relation to our whiskey?
Calculations. Not really calculations, but we are looking for a profile. So it's very much done by the eye, and by the nose, and by the palate. So it is a sensory thing that we're looking at. We also run it through an instrument in our lab called HPLC, and it looks at the maturation related compounds. So that's the compounds that aren't present in new make spirit, but increase during the maturation process. And so we look at the maturation related compounds of the spirit before it goes into the casks, and then we look at it as it's maturing. So that gives us an indication of what we're taking out of the cask, and also, you know, how much it's got left in it if we want to use it again. So not really a calculation. You know, experience is telling us, you know, roughly how long we should be taking to get a good finish from a wine cask. And it would be hard to put a kind of, you know, a certain time on it, because, you know, casks aren't made in the same way. So they're made from perhaps different trees or several trees coming together. They're made by people. And so they all have their own little nuances and own little quirks. And so it would be difficult to say that, you know, this set of casks took this amount of time, and so this set of casks will take the same amount of time. So that's the reason for us sampling on a regular basis, so that we can ensure that that we're going to catch it before there's too much wine influence coming through.
Very cool. Now, just quickly, for all of the attendees who are on, I'm going to ask a question from Scott again. We're going to have to wrap this up in a few. If there's any other questions you have for Stephanie, then please feel free to fire them through now before we wrap up.
Yeah, well, just one last thing. I told you I was going to give you a little teaser at the very end. And this is our latest offering. It's Aberfeldy 21-year-old. And we're continuing on our French theme. It's been finished in Saint-Emilion red wine casks. So you must have heard of Saint-Emilion. So it's a really famous wine region in Bordeaux. And this is classed as a Grand Cru Class A wine that has been in here. We cannot reveal the chateau, but it is a beautiful wine, and we were thrilled when these casks came our way. So it's 43%. It was finished in these casks for just over a year. So again, we went through the same process of sampling, and it really is a cracker. You would expect me to say that, but it really is a beautiful wine. It's velvety in texture. And again, the red fruits are coming through. I don't actually even have, I've just got a very small sample of it. I was rushing about today and managed to get a little sample. Soft, ripe peaches coming through. It's really laden with fruit. Gareth's mouth is watering, I can see. Succulent apricots that are steeped in honey. So just really laden. Vanilla, coconut, but balanced with this refreshing zing of menthol. Now you might be wondering, menthol, but really you find this in whiskey, and I love when I find it, because it just kind of opens up your palate and just makes you really think, what on earth is going on? There's just so much interest. So already lots of complexity, lots of flavor, because it's 21-year-old. And then we've put it into these Saint-Emilion red wine casks, and it just a match made in heaven. You know, the wine influence is unmistakable, but so too is the fact that it's Aberfeldy and that it's a Scotch whisky. So we haven't tipped over into, you know, fully wine and lots of tannins. It's still soft and beautifully nuanced. So that should be coming your way soon. I don't know when, but you're really in for a treat with this one. You know, we're really excited. You're saying, what's your favorite?
Well, thanks for that,
Rôtie
Stephanie.
might have a run for its money here.
I love being teased with things that I can't try. It just fills my heart with joy, but it sounds incredible. So look, I'm going to quickly reword the question that came through from Scott earlier in relation to what you just told us about the 21. So look, 18-year-old Côte Rôtie, 21-year-old, different age statement. Of course, we have Saint-Emilion finish. What was it about those age statements that made you feel that they'd be best suited towards the finishes that you applied to those whiskies?
We felt with the Saint-Emilion that, you know, it's a more robust style of wine. And so we felt just intuitively that Aberfeldy 21 would be best suited to this style of wine. And sometimes it is really just about that. It's about, you know, feeling that something is right, you know, based on the experience that you've had before, and also, you know, very much hoping that it does what you think it's going to do, and you know, that's where the sampling comes in, and that's where the nurturing and watching it, and you know, it's almost like, you know, waiting for the birth, pacing up and down, you know, waiting to sample. Oh, it's ready, and you know, and you know, the guys that are in our warehouses who look after the whiskey, they are interested in it as well, because they see the cask coming in, they know what the whiskey's like, and they love to see it coming out of the cask as well. So part of it is experience, but part of it is just this intuition, knowing the style of your whiskey, knowing the style of the casks, and really believing that they're going to work together.
Well, Stephanie, based on the 18-year-old, which I've been very lucky enough to be able to try over the past few weeks, I can't wait for the release of the 21. I mean, I think we're almost out of time. What I did want to say is thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, especially everyone from Total Wine and More Concierge Sales. Stephanie, it is always a pleasure to be able to do these with you, and I really appreciate you staying up so late, especially as you're back in Scotland. The Aberfeldy 18 has been on pre-order, I believe, with Total Wine and More, and will be available within the immediate future. And to the best of my reckoning, the 21-year-old will be available for everyone next year, and should be available through Total Wine and More as well. And outside of that, I mean, time's something very precious that we have, and to share it with Stephanie and myself, for all of you who joined us this evening, it really does mean a lot. Thank you all, and have an incredible Thursday evening. And Stephanie, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Gareth. I really enjoyed it. And thanks everyone for joining us. All that remains to say is slange.